In Franklin's writing remarks concerning the savages of North America, he is often using rhetorical strategies to show how the Native Americans are not in fact savages. One example of this strategy would be juxtaposition, as he is often showing the differences between the Native American and British societies. An example of juxtaposition would be when he talks about the council meetings that both of these people hold, and how the Native Americans have much more civilized and polite council meetings where no one interrupts another. However, when talking about the British, he says scarce a day goes by without some confusion, and also says that they will often interrupt each other, showing that they are much more impolite and much more savage in this situation. By doing so, he is establishing logos, as the reader will be able to logically assume that Native Americans are much more civilized in this situation. Another rhetorical strategy that Franklin uses would be a point of view switch. When he does this, he is speaking in the voice of the Native Americans and establishing some credibility for them, as the white people will see him as much more trustworthy than if a Native American was to speak. And this uses ethos, as the Native Americans will now have a much more credible voice. And an example of when he does a point of view switch would be when the Native Americans were offered to go to the white people's colleges, but instead declined. Franklin then says, our ideas of this kind of education happen to not be the same with yours. He says this in the voice of the Native Americans, and by doing so establishes much more credibility towards this statement than if it was said by the Native Americans. By doing these strategies, Franklin is arguing that the Native Americans are not in fact the savages in this situation and in any of the situations, and are much more polite than the British happen to be. He is showing that the British are in fact more savage than the Native Americans, and that the Native Americans should not be called savages.